Now let's come a little closer to home, us here in France. The French President Emmanuel Macron aiming to name a new Prime Minister for France within 48 hours. And that was said yesterday as party chiefs who met him said afterwards he's aiming to end the political deadlock quickly. The President invited leaders from across the political spectrum, but notably he left out both the far-right National Rally and the hard-left France Unbowed, both of whom hold the key to France's hung parliament. Well, let's talk now to our international affairs editor, Philip Turle, who joins us here on set. Philip, just remind us, particularly for people who don't follow every in and out of this, why France has no prime minister in the first place.
Well, I mean, it's complicated for an overseas public, but it is quite complicated for a French public as well. So
very true.
This all has its roots in the European elections last year, in which Marine Le Pen's National Rally did better than expected. So Emmanuel Macron, in a bid to counter her influence, dissolved the National Assembly in June to call snap elections in this country to try to reboost his own majority or relative majority in the National Assembly. It failed miserably and created three different groups. Now, he named Michel Barnier as Prime Minister as a result of that failed dissolution. He comes from the right wing. And Michel Barnier is the shortest-lived Prime Minister in French history because he has been victim of a vote of no confidence last week after only 89 days in office. So that means France doesn't have a prime minister right now, and it doesn't have a government right now, and that's why Emmanuel Macron has been talking to opposition parties. Now, as I said, there are three parties or three groups in the National Assembly who are vying for control, and the problem is that they all hate each other. They have on the far left the Communists, the Socialists, the Greens, and the France Unbowed far-left party, 192 seats. On the far right, you have the National Rally, which has 124 seats. And in the middle, you have the centre parties and the Conservative or the right-wing parties who have 249. None of them have enough. They need 289 seats to have a majority in the National Assembly. So they have to work with each other, either against Emmanuel Macron or work with each other to get legislation voted through. And it all fell flat as a result of the budget, which the France Unbowed party on the far left and the grouping of left-wing parties voted against, along with the National Rally. They got over 300 seats. That's why 300 votes. That's why the Prime Minister was voted out of office. And that's why Emmanuel Macron now needs to name a new Prime Minister. But he's still in the same position where he has to try to shore up support amongst those three groups for a Prime Minister who will be able to pass legislation. And that's the big problem facing the French president.
And the crucial point is, looking at that graph, the pink and the purple on there, both the far right and the far left have been absent from these discussions. I mean, Emmanuel Macron didn't even invite them, even though the pink part, the Popular Front, have the most seats in Parliament, and the purple part are the biggest party in the Parliament.
Yeah, and the reason for that is that the France Unbowed, the far left, they have just made it quite clear that whatever happens, they're going to try to upstage Emmanuel Macron. They want him to resign, and they want new fresh elections in this country, and that's all they will stand for, unless Emmanuel Macron names a candidate from their party, which he's just not willing to do. As far as the far right is concerned, Emmanuel Macron is trying to push away Marine Le Pen's influence because she was really kingmaker up until the fall of Michel Barnier. What he wants to do now is to try to pull the socialists away from the left-wing alliance. They have 66 seats. If he can bring them on board, that means that even if the far left and the far right get together, they won't have a majority. They won't be able to upset and upstage Emmanuel Macron and bring the government down, and that will make the influence of Marine Le Pen a lot weaker. As far as Marine Le Pen is concerned, she really doesn't want that to happen. She would like early elections because she has more problems to face, i.e. she could go to prison for embezzling EU funds and worse still could face ineligibility for the 2027 presidential elections. That's why she's trying to go faster now to have presidential elections early in a bid to obtain immunity and to become president of France. All that looks pretty unlikely. I said it was complicated. It really is quite complicated. Yeah. But in the next 48 hours, we should get the name of a candidate for prime minister if all goes according to plan.
If this continues to be a mess, though, Philip, and if it becomes a mess once again and they still can't get something sorted out, where does it leave Emmanuel Macron? I mean, in theory, he's in office, isn't he, until 2027?
Well, that is true, and he can stay president. He can not be forced out of office. He may be obliged to call early elections. If you look at this chart here, 62% of French people, when asked, say, well, they think Emmanuel Macron should resign because he is the problem here. He's the one who's created this situation. And if he were to call early presidential elections, that would sort everything out. Well, not exactly, because there can't be fresh legislative elections in France, parliamentary elections, until next June. So even if a new president does come into office in February or March next year, they still can't do anything more than what Emmanuel Macron is doing right now, because the groups in the National Assembly will be the same. They don't get on with each other. There's a lot of political shenanigans going on. So it all seems to be deadlocked. I think the big question now is, will this new prime minister, if he or she comes from the left, be able to consolidate power, push through legislation, and keep Emmanuel Macron in power until 2027, not being victim to another vote of no confidence? We'll have to wait and see.